everyone, this is Miss Ann here at the Warminster Township Free Library, and welcome back to day 4 of our Little Garden Growers program. Today we're going to be talking about parts of a flower. So the topic is, what are the different parts of a flower? So some of the words that we're going to be learning, and these are new words, the stamen, which is the male reproductive side of a flower, has the anther and the filament. The carpel or pistil has a part of the stigma, has within it the stigma, style, and ovary and ovules. That's the female side of our plants and flowers. We're going to talk about what a sepal is and stems, and a little bit about perennials and annuals. So first, let's start with a book From Seed to Plant by Gail Gibbons.
So today we're going to be talking about the parts of a flower. So the first thing we're going to be doing is we are going to be reading a story. This is called From Seed to Plant by Gail Gibbons. We're going to learn about all the different parts of a flower, and then we're going to come back and do our observation activity, and then our main activity, which includes all the materials in that kit that you picked up. So let's get started with our book, From Seed to Plant. We got to do some learning first. All right, so what's great is that this is also a fantastic review. So it talks a little bit about day 2, all about seeds. So here we go. Most plants make seeds, which we learned about from day 2. A seed contains the beginning of a new plant. So a seed for, let's say, a daisy is going to create a new daisy. And seeds come in very different shapes, sizes, and colors. Some of these you may recognize, like an acorn over here. And I've seen ones that have these little bits on them, kind of like the dandelion seeds, or the butterfly weed, that's that bright orange plant. I've seen those too. All seeds grow into the same kind of plant that made them, which we learned about on day 2 as well. Many plants grow flowers. Flowers are where most seeds begin. A flower is made up of many parts. So we're going to talk about these parts now. Let's start with the stuff that we know. We know that down here is a stem, and it leads up to our flower. And that our flower has these beautiful, colorful petals. So we know those. We see those. Those are the big parts. What we don't know, maybe, is that underneath our petals, there are these protective barriers called sepals, which are the green right here. Sometimes they're green, sometimes they look a lot like petals too. So at the bottom, so let's start with, there's 2 different types. Let's start with these little bits that are coming off. They kind of look like little snakes with orange heads. So these are called stamens, and they make yellow powder called pollen. And maybe you know a little bit about pollen. Maybe you remember mommy or daddy saying, "Oh, the pollen makes my allergies so much worse." Well, that's because pollen's on these flowers, and then they're kind of like a powder, and you could sneeze. So the part of the flower around the pistils are stamens. So these are the stamens here. So what is a pistil? Well, in the center of the flower, this is called a pistil or a carpel. So the center, we have our stamens coming off and our pistil or carpel in the center. So the sticky part at the very top of the pistil is called the stigma. So there's our stigma, very sticky. It's attracting that pollen, it wants that pollen. And at the very bottom of this pistil or carpel, in this very center, are tiny egg cells called ovules. And we call this the ovary because it has all the ovules, which are little tiny eggs that turn into seeds when there's pollen. So lots of things. Before a seed can begin to grow, a grain of pollen from the stamen must land on the stigma at the top of the pistil of a flower like itself. This is called pollination. So we talked about how the stamens off to the side, these little look like snakes with little orange heads. This has pollen, and that pollen, when a bee or a bumblebee or a hummingbird goes there, they kind of put it on their shirt. It's like if you were eating and you got crumbs all over you. And then they travel to another plant, and accidentally sometimes they hit into the stigma. And the stigma is really sticky, and that pollen will stick to it. And so pollen needs to make it to this top bit here, When the pollen goes here, it's going to help make sure that these ovules, these little eggs, turn into seeds. Pollination happens in different ways. Often wind blows pollen from flower to flower, so the wind can help out. And this is where we're going to touch on this for day 5, so we're learning a little bit. Bees, other insects, and hummingbirds help pollinate too. While they visit flowers for their sweet juice called nectar, pollen rubs onto their bodies. Then they carry the pollen to another flower where it comes off onto its pistils. So again, they're taking that pollen and they're bringing it from one place to another, from one flower to another, and it's going onto that middle bit, that tall pistil or carpel. If a pollen grain from a flower lands on the pistil, so on the top bit here, of the same kind of flower, it grows a long tube through the pistil, so it's going through into the ovule. This is the beginning of a seed. The seed grows inside the flower, even as the flower begins to die. As the seed becomes bigger, a fruit or pod grows around them. The fruit or pod protects the seeds. So anytime that you've, say, eaten an apple or maybe blackberries, those actually have seeds in them, and that fruit is protecting those seeds, or maybe a pod is protecting those seeds. When the fruit or pod ripens, it breaks open. The seeds are ready to become new plants. Some seeds fall to the ground around the base of the plant where they will grow. So we're going to be talking about annuals. Annuals come back every year, but there's something called annuals only come back, they die off, and they sometimes have seeds that you can take and then replant them. Perennials come back every year. My apologies. Annuals don't. They die off and then they're done. But there are some annuals that they do this. They create seeds and then the seeds drop, and they call themselves self-seeding annuals. And so they just drop their seeds right next to it, and then another one will grow the next day. Dill is a good example of that. But perennials, they'll come back every year. Their root system will just keep growing. We're going to be talking more about that in a little bit. Some pods or fruits open and the seeds pop out. Sometimes when birds eat berries, they drop the seeds. Other seeds fall into streams, ponds, rivers, or the ocean. There they travel on the water until they stick to dirt along a shore. So they can just travel all around. A good example of this is a dandelion, especially if you blow a dandelion, the seeds go everywhere. So that fluffy bit, that's the seeds of a dandelion, like these. The wind scatters seeds. Some seeds have fluff on them that lets them float to the ground like tiny parachutes. Others have wings that spin as they fall. Animals help scatter seeds too. They hide acorns and nuts in the ground. Some seeds have hooks that stick to the fur of animals or people's clothes. Later, they drop off onto the ground. So I've seen things like that. Acorns, sometimes you might get an oak tree because a squirrel forgot where they buried their acorns. A flower bed or a vegetable garden is beautiful. Seeds are planted to grow into the garden. The seeds come in small envelopes or boxes. Directions explain how to plant the seeds and care for the plants, which we talked about in day 2. That's why I love this book. It's a really good overview of all the things we talked about. The beginning of a plant is curled up inside each seed. Oh, we learned about this too on day 2. Food is stored inside the seed too. The seed has a seed coat on the outside to protect it. So when we did our lima bean demonstration and dissected that lima bean, this is kind of what it looked like. We had the outer shell, we have the beginnings of the plant here. A seed will not sprout until certain things happen. First, it must be in the right soil. Then it needs rain to soak the seed and soften its seed coat. So it does need water. That's what we had to do. We had to soak that seed in order to dissect it. When the sun shines and warms the ground, the seed coat breaks open and the seed begins to grow. This is called germination. Oh, look at this overview that we're doing. A root grows down into the soil. The root takes in water and minerals from the soil for food. Up grows a shoot. Green leaves grow up from the shoot towards the sun. The plant grows bigger and bigger. The leaves make food. for the plant from the water and minerals in the soil, the sunlight and air all around the plant. Finally, the plant is full grown. Buds on the plant open into flowers where new seeds will grow. And guess what? We have a flower with a petal. And all the things we learned about all the parts of a flower are inside that little flower. And again, if it gets pollinated by our fantastic pollinators, we'll get new seeds for next year. Many of the foods people eat are seeds, fruits, and pods. They are full of nutrition, vitamins, and minerals, and they are tasty too. So these are all part of things that may have had, a flower attached to them that then turned into a fruit that had seeds on the inside. So these are all different things, and you can actually buy a lot of these seeds in stores, like pumpkin seeds and carrot seeds, and seeds for apples too. And so even this book I really like has a couple of the projects that we worked on and that we did, right? We had our seed pods that we planted our seeds in there, and then we also earlier on day 2 we soaked our lima beans and then watched them grow. So it talks all about that, but also about the nitty-gritty about like what makes up all the parts of a flower and how we get those seeds. So this is called From Seed to Plant. In a moment we're going to come back, and then we're going to do our observation activity by dissecting a flower. So stay tuned.
Okay, so with that book, we not only touched on a lot of the things that we learned about in day 2, we also learned about a few other things. So some of the questions that you should be able to answer after our discussion and after the book: how do plants create seeds? Where do seeds form? What are the parts of the flower? And what are annuals versus perennials? So these are some things that we already touched on in the book, but we're going to talk about them again in a little bit more detail. So at this point in your kits, you would have gotten a handout that looks like this. We're going to be using this for both the observation activity as well as the main activity today. So this is the parts of the flower. We have the petals, and that's going to be the colorful bit, and you might know what the stem of a flower is. The stem leads up to what is called a sepal, and it looks a lot like little leaves, and unfortunately it's not the leaves, it's actually a sepal, and it protects the flower buds. And then we have outside, so we're going to work outside in. So the outside area, you'll see what's called the stamens, and this is the reproduction, the male side. This is what creates pollen. And then tomorrow in our discussion, we're going to be talking about pollinators, which we already kind of mentioned in our book, but we're going to talk about that more in depth. Those pollinators collect the pollen that's on those stamens. The stamen has 2 parts: the anther in yellow, those little yellow, they kind of look like corn pops to me. So the little yellow bits, and then it moves down into the green, what looks kind of like its own little stem, and those are called the filaments. So we have 6 of those, 3 on one side and 3 on the other. And then we have this large part, in the center. And the center part, together, that's the carpel or the pistil. The pistil is considered one or more carpels. So the carpel is, all of the things that where the seeds are going to form. It's the reproduction side and it's the female reproduction angle and reproduction side. So at the very top of our carpel, of our pistil, in the very center, we have the stigma. And then that leads down to the style and the pollen tube. That's where the pollen is going to go. It's going to go from the stigma, which is kind of sticky, all the way down. And it's going to go into the ovary, which is the space or area where you have ovules. Those are like little eggs, but really they're the beginning parts of a seed. It needs pollen to then transform into a seed. And as we learned about in our book, sometimes after a flower like this, it might grow a fruit or just grow into seed pods. I've seen it done both ways. If you've ever had an apple, if you've ever had blackberries, those are good examples of fruits that have seeds in them. Last but not least, we're going to talk about annuals and perennial plants, because I think it's important to know the distinction between the two. Annuals need to be planted annually. they grow and then they die, and that's it. And they do that within the year. So they'll grow from a seed into a plant, beautiful flowers. They will often have flowers throughout their cycle, throughout many of the seasons, and then they will die, and they will not come back after they've died after the season. So it's pretty much like one cycle. However, perennials are different. Perennials keep coming back year after year. Annuals, just like annuals, perennials also have seeds. Annuals will create seeds, and then you can use those seeds to plant a new plant. That's how you can keep getting the same annuals every year, like mums and things like that. You get them from seeds or from stores, and they have little packs. But perennials, the root systems kind of lay dormant, and it will come back the next year. So usually the first year, you're not going to get much, not a lot of flowers, maybe not a good bloom, but after a few years, maybe the second or third year, it's going to come back and it's going to become fuller and bigger than before. A good example of this is New York ironweed, which I have in my house. It's this tall plant that has beautiful purple flowers, and it's a native plant. It means that it comes from this area. And last year, it was only about 6 feet tall. This year, it is well over 8, and it's now way bushier and bigger than before. So, perennials will get bigger and bigger each year. You do have to cut them down sometimes, or, trim them up a bit. Now, perennials and annuals will both create seeds that you can harvest and then plant new plants. Annuals, there are some plants, we learned about this in the book, where the seeds will create and then drop the seeds right where they are. That's called self-seeding annuals. They'll just throw down their seeds right away, and then you'll have them year after year, but they're not perennials. They're actually growing from seeds. Okay, so now I think we're ready for the observation activity. In this observation activity, we're going to dissect a flower, so stay tuned for that.
So after reading our story, From Seed to Plant by Gail Gibbons, I think we learned a lot about the parts of a plant. So for our observation activity today, we're going to dissect a flower. Now you can do this at home on your own if you have a garden out back and your mom or your dad or your grown-up allows you to take a flower and then take it apart. Do ask them before you take out flowers from your garden. You could also take out flowers that might be just growing randomly in your garden. Sometimes we have what's called weeds or unwanted plants in places we don't want them, and you can dissect that as well. If you do not have flowers in your backyard or close by, what you can also do is observe all the things that we're going to be talking about. You never want to pluck flowers from, say, somebody else's garden or even a park. It doesn't belong to you, and they're there for everyone to enjoy. But you can observe them to kind of go over everything. So what I have here is a tiger lily. So this was from my garden at my house, and so I decided to bring one in to show you. So I have it sitting in some water, and it used to be pretty tall, so I just took the top off. That's okay. Sometimes it grows more than one stem kind of from the base, and so I was able to just take one off. And you can see it has this beautiful orange color with a little bit of dark orange on the inside and a little bit lighter orange on the inside as well. So this is what we call a tiger lily. We can tell because of the color and the way that it blooms. So down here is where the stem would be. And to dissect a plant, what you're going to need is some sort of placemat. You can use a newspaper. I'm going to use a paper plate. If you're going to be taking flowers and you're going to be working with them later, you would need to soak them in water just so that they don't dry out. So I did that earlier, but we don't need it for when we dissect. Now, from your kits that we provided, there are toothpicks, and there's extra toothpicks, so you can use this to kind of separate things. I found when I tried this out that I didn't need it. All I needed was my fingers. But if you have a different kind of flower, perhaps you'll need toothpicks, a plastic knife with parental supervision, or scissors. And then, of course, because I soaked it in water, I have paper towels just in case. So what you're also going to need from your kit is your handout. This is going to help us identify all the parts of a flower, okay? So first we're going to talk about the stem. So this stem, I trimmed it. I used the little snippers and I snipped it off, but the stem is actually quite long. It's like 3 feet tall. It's pretty tall. So I took just a little bit, like a haircut, just off the top. And then it's going to go up to this bottom bit here. So this is another petal, but it kind of comes into the stem. So it's very similar to what is our sepal. Some flowers have green sepals and they kind of just hold in the plant, and this protects the plant and the the system that a plant will make seeds. So it's protecting that. So we're just going to be really gentle and just kind of take them off, just so we can expose what's underneath. So there we go. There we go. There. So we just expose that first layer of sepal, or in this case they look like petals. So then you have the actual petals on the inside, and so next we're going to take those off. And you can just put them off to the side, or if you have a handout or something at home that has all this labeled, you can do that too. So we have that. And this is very beautiful colors. Thankfully I have a lot of these, so and it's like a haircut. Eventually they die, and then you just snip them off. So don't worry, I didn't cut a piece of a plant that it won't grow back. Next year or later this year, it'll grow back. Just like our hair will grow back if we trim it. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm exposing or showing you the inside of our plant. So we actually have, this was on the inside of it. So now that we've taken the petals off, we're showing you the inside, which is all of these little bits. So these tall things that have a little bit of that dark brown at the top, those are what's called the stamen. And if you looked on your handout, there's 2 parts of a stamen. There's the anther, which is at the top, and then the stick that is the filament. So now we're going to take one of those off. There we go. Anther, filament. And you can put that on your plate. And you're going to take all of those off because we're going to try to expose the middle section of our plant. And if you notice on the anthers, I just got a little bit on my finger. That's pollen. A little bit of the brown bit is pollen. And that's what happens. The pollen needs to go onto the stigma, or the very, very middle tip. And actually, I think it's this one, not this, because that looks, I'm not entirely sure. Oh, that's cool. There it is. So I'm using my observation skills, and it actually looks like this one might have 2 of them, which is kind of cool. I cannot tell which, because neither of one of these has an anther on top. So I'm going to leave them both, because I can't tell, and it might have actually knocked one off. But this is after I took away the stamen, the male reproductive side. I am left with the carpel or the pistil, which encompasses at the very top the stigma, and then the style, which goes all the way down, and then at this base here, you might be able to see it's kind of greenish. That is the ovary with the ovules inside. That has all the seeds in there. So if this got pollinated by a bee with pollen, remember pollen comes from our anthers and our filaments. So when pollen went to the top, it will travel down, and then it will make sure that that ovule in the ovaries, that little egg, becomes a seed. And then it has to mature a little bit, and then eventually we can take those seeds and plant a new lily. So really, really cool. And this is interesting because I'm using my observation skills to see if this is actually which one's which. But they actually look like they're both going to the same bit, so it's possible that there's 2 accidentally. Sometimes little mutations like this happen, changes that we don't expect. So very cool. So this represents our female reproductive system and all the things that are in part of it. So we have that here. So on this side we have our male reproductive system that creates all the pollen, and then this side we have the female reproductive system that has like the seeds and just needs the pollen to help it out. So you can use your parts of a flower handout here and little diagram rather, to kind of help you as you go on to, dissect your flower. So in a moment we're going to come back with our main activity from our kits. So stay tuned.
So now that we have a better understanding of the parts of the flower, we are ready for our main activity. Using the materials in your kit, you're going to create a flower replica, and we're going to talk about all the different parts of a flower.
So now we're on to the main activity, and that's where you're going to be using what's in your bag. So let's go over the contents of the kit that you have. I already pulled everything out. So in your kit, you will get some Play-Doh. Feel free to supplement with other Play-Doh that you might have on hand. Other things that you will have is a baggie full of marshmallows, and then you will also be getting a straw, and you may need to cut that straw in half, as well as some toothpicks. And you could use the toothpicks, by the way, for the first activity, for the observation activity that we did as well. Alright, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be building a replica of a flower and then going over all the parts of a flower. So I actually have a paper plate that I wasn't using, so I'm going to be using that to build my flower base. So I also have our demo flower here that we can look at and kind of help us. So the first thing you're going to want to do is take out some of your Play-Doh. So you can do that at this time. Your Play-Doh is going to be serving as the petals for your replica flower. And so what you might need to do is divide this into some small parts, maybe 5 or 6, because you want to have a good amount of, do that, there we go, a good amount of petals. And now this is where you can have some fun. You can shape your petals however you'd like. What I do recommend is that you take one of your pieces of straw and use it as a base, and then build everything onto it. So let me move that out of the way so you guys can see. So you're going to be using this to kind of build your flower. So now this is the kind of the fun part. You're going to be building your flower petals, and you can kind of just have them go around like that. You can be as fanciful as you want. You can use some of your toothpicks to help you shape if you need that. If you want to add like detailing, you can do that. I'm going to be kind of quick just to show you, but feel free to pause this video while you're building everything. That way you can do it at your own pace. And just kind of go around the base of what is going to be your carpel or your pistil. Now, your pistil may have misspoken earlier. A pistil is actually one or more carpels, which is that female reproductive system that has where the seeds are going to form. All right, and then you can form some more of your petals here. And they don't need to be pretty. They're going to be serving as a demonstration. And feel free, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave them on here, and then you can add more detailing. You can it's a little bit easier if you have it in one spot. I have one more. Where do I want to put it? Maybe right there. So I'm just going to have it be there, but you can practice kind of shaping it and turning it into more of a actual flower. You can actually have it like this if you wanted to do it, like have them kind of go like that, and they kind of look like the petals are, it's just blooming. I'm going to leave them out here so that you guys can see. So we have our petals. We've got our carpel or our pistil system. And now we're going to be adding the male system, and that is going to have, that's going to be our stamen with our anthers and our filaments. So for that one, we just take our toothpicks and we kind of just put them all around, like so. So we're just going to put them all around, and maybe only one more, like that. So we got our, everything's here. We got our petals. We've got over here in our center bit, we have our carpel or our pistil, and then we have what right now is representing just the filament. This is when you're going to grab your marshmallows out. Our marshmallows are going to represent, especially on our stamens, the anthers. So for this one, you can just kind of go like this and put them on. And you may need to smush things in a little bit, get everything to stay. There we go. And I actually, in one of the demos that I was doing earlier, when I was testing this out, I put one of these inside the tube, and or maybe it's like a piece of one, to represent the like ovary and the ovules down there. And then what you could also do is put a piece of clay, or maybe if you have another color of Play-Doh, you can put some at the top like that, which represents our stigma. So our stigma is always at the top, and then we have the style, and then the pollen tube is on the inside, and then you have down here, we already put that little bit of marshmallow, which represents our ovary and ovule. That's where the seeds are going to be. They're going to be like down at the base here. And then we obviously have our petals, and then inside that we have our filaments and our anthers. This apparatus, the anther and the filament, represents the stamen. And then this, with our ovary inside, represents our carpel or our pistil. And then that's our parts of a flower. So you guys can kind of demo this. Use your handout, your sheet that you were given, which I have off to the side here. Here we go. Use this to kind of help you figure out what each of these parts are in your replica and in your demonstration. It's the same thing as you would be doing if you were to take apart the flower that we have. Okay? All right, so that is our activity. We hope you enjoyed it. We have one more slide with some extra stuff that you might want to read, extra books about this topic and about plants in general. But tomorrow we will be back with another session all about our fantastic pollinators, and we're going to learn about pollination. So that'll be day 5, all about pollinators and pollination. So we hope that you will tune in for that. Until next time, everyone. Bye.
All right, you guys. If you watched this entire video, then you know a lot about parts of a flower. But some other books that are going to be really good resources for you is Planting a Rainbow by Lois Ehlert, Look, Flowers by Stephanie Colmonson, and then Plant Structures by Nancy Dickman. And we have a variety of other books that are going to be good for that here at the Bucks County Library System, as well as Warminster Township Free Library. So feel free to stop in and we can get you some more books about the different parts of a plant, and specifically flowers.